What's up, everybody? This is the Nowhere to Go But Up podcast. I'm your host, Sean Dustin. We got a good guest for you this evening. We've got Mark M. Bello, who is a legal crime thriller author. I think I got that right. He's written a bunch of books. A really interesting guy here. Was hooked up by publicist Adrian. Thank you, Adrian. Shout out to you. Let's see. Oh, yeah. New website, SeanDustin.com. If you haven't checked it out, go on over there. Every place that the podcast is over on SeanDustin.com. It's actually a pod page, which is a really cool service. I was trying to use, what's that one? WordPress. Had a site for a year, couldn't figure it out. And so I just went over there. Super simple. So if you got a podcast and you're looking for a good place to have a website or somewhere to direct your audience to, podpage.com. Check it out. That's a great place to go. Super simple and affordable too. So they're not paying me. I just knocked off a lot of time and I should have done this a long time ago. So SeanDustin.com. Check it out. We'll get to the interview or conversation here after the intro. So we'll catch you in a minute.
Sean Dustin spent time in federal and state prison for drug trafficking and fraud. Upon release in 2006, he had nothing but the clothes on his back, a bag of mail, and legal paperwork. In 2010, he kicked a long-time methamphetamine habit and started the long climb back up the ladder of life. This is the Nowhere to Go But Up podcast. If you want transparency and authenticity, you're in the right place. This is the Nowhere to Go But Up podcast, and this is Sean Dustin.
Hey, Mark. How you doing?
I'm good. I like that intro.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. So, hey, good to have you on the show. You are a author and you've written a lot of books. You were just naming off a bunch before we got into the intro and everything. That's quite a list of books that you've written. So, how did you go from being a lawyer? What kind of law did you, what does it say, civil justice? What kind of an attorney were you?
I had a civil justice practice, primarily auto accidents, police brutality cases, a few medical malpractice cases, a few workers' compensation cases. I help people fight insurance companies. David beat Goliath. That's kind of what my practice was about. Early in my practice, when I was in my 30s, I'm 70 now, I handled a case where a couple of kids were abused sexually by a Catholic priest. The case was so troubling to me, not just from the standpoint of a priest doing this to a couple of kids, but the way the church behaved in terms of transferring offenders, hiding witnesses, covering up prior incidents by the same priest, transferring him from place to place, doing despicable things to avoid the consequences. I said to myself way back then, 35 some years ago, I should write a book about this. And in about 2000, I would say, I sat down, I started to write a nonfiction account, an actual account of the way things went down. And it wasn't happening for me. It was almost like writing a legal brief, which I can tell you most people find pretty boring. So I decided to turn it into a novel, embellish it a bit, write it about the church rather than picking on a particular denomination, because I believe, frankly, that something like that can happen anywhere, but not the way the Catholic Church handles it, the way I described to you. Most people, like the Boy Scouts or other situations finally come clean and do something about it. The Catholic Church for years has covered this up, transferred predators to communities who didn't know they were predators, and the cycle would begin all over again. So I had to write something about it. I promised myself as a bucket list item that I would. And finally, about 5 years ago, after I retired from practicing law, I wrote Betrayal of Faith, which is the first book in the legal thriller series you mentioned. And it is about a couple of kids who are abused sexually by a priest.
So why do you think they hid that for so long? Do you think it was because that was just the culture of the Catholic Church? Like they were all doing it, so it was like, we'll just keep, it's our little secret, and we'll just keep this thing rolling, or like what? I don't understand that.
Well, they were all doing it is an overstatement. I'm sure there are plenty of honest and terrific clergymen in the Catholic clergy. But there is this dirty little secret out there, and there was a cover up by various members of the hierarchy. I don't know how high it went. I don't know that popes were involved or anything like that. But I certainly know, for instance, at the local level, that archbishops were involved and that those are the people who are responsible for transferring a priest from place to place. So when a priest, for instance, in my situation, is transferred from Wyandotte, Michigan to Farmington Hills, Michigan, the actual story, and 4 boys are molested in Wyandotte, but nobody tells Farmington Hills, and they go so far as to settle a personal injury case for those 4 boys sealed by the court. Why the court is implicit in this kind of blows my mind. We can talk about that. They even get judges to participate in the cover up. I don't think they do it realizing that's what they're doing. They're probably just trying to avoid unnecessary scandal, but that's what they're doing. They're enabling the predator to do it again, and that's what happened in Farmington Hills in my case. A priest who had molested 4 boys in Wyandotte molested 2 boys in Farmington Hills. And the cycle began all over again. From Farmington Hills, he was transferred to Cleveland. I wrote a letter to the Cleveland plain dealer, basically laying out the facts of the case so that the citizens of Cleveland, wherever he went, whatever church he went to, would be aware that there was a predator in their midst. As a result of my letter, they transferred him to Baltimore, Maryland. You can't make this stuff up. Truth is better than fiction in this situation.
Yeah,
but that's what happened. I mean, that's what happened with this one priest. The good news at the very end of it all is Michigan now has an all-female, all-Democratic government. I'm not talking about the legislature, but the governor, the secretary of state, the attorney general are all female, and they're all Democrats. But I don't know what the politics of the show is, but a Democratic attorney general will not tolerate a predator priest. And this gentleman resurfaced in Illinois, I think it is. The attorney general got wind of some unresolved crimes that he committed in Michigan, and she went after him in his 70s or 80s, and he's now in prison thanks to her and thanks to the bravery of some people that came forward and said, let's get this guy off the streets. Now, prior to that, he was defrocked, finally, but that didn't take place until very much later in life. So that's the history lesson. The book is an embellished version of what I would say what the cover-up feels like. here's this down and out lawyer. He has some characteristics of me. He has some characteristics of Paul Newman in The Verdict. he, he has some characteristics of lawyers I know. But when in his heyday, before he had a fall from grace, he handled a wrongful death case for the mother of these two kids. And he's the only lawyer she knows. So she contacts him, hires him. He pulls himself out of the gutter and takes on Goliath. And that's essentially what the book is about.
There was a Spotlight. That was a movie about the priests in, was it Massachusetts?
Boston, yeah.
Boston, that area?
In
Excuse me.
Boston, Massachusetts.
So yeah, I mean it's definitely a problem for a while. Hopefully it's been sort of wiped out. Who knows though? I grew up Catholic and I did all the catechism and all the stuff like that, but I was never altar boy or any of that, and was never left alone with anybody.
Be thankful for that.
Yeah. So you said you also written some children's books that you want to talk about.
I have. I wrote a book about a child who is biracial. His father is black, his mother is white. He's lived a very typical, normal life for his first 5 years. He wasn't aware that we live in a racist society. And he goes to school for the first time, all excited as a kindergartner. And he's obviously different than the other children. And a bully comes and knocks him down on the playground. Why did you do that? You're not like us. You shouldn't be. And the book basically tells the story of how the school rallies around the child, punishes the bully. And, you know, it's a young children's picture book. I have one somewhere. It's a young children's picture book. And I didn't want to make it dark, but I did want to make it a message book for kids young enough to be prevented from being bullies in the future. And that's what I did with the second book as well, which is a book about a little auto accident that happens to a family because the person who crashes into them is texting while he's driving. And I wanted children at a very young age, before they get their hands on one of these, to realize how dangerous it is to carry to use a cell phone while they're driving a car. And as you know, I don't think it would be a surprise to you or any of your guests, or any of your listeners rather, parents are giving their kids cell phones much younger than maybe I gave my kids cell phones or you gave yours.
I haven't given mine yet.
Well, I'm trying to get this message out to kids before they get their hands on phones. So again, by writing books for small children with pictures and explaining in a child's story and rhyme way, and these are basically poems, stories and rhyme, in a child-friendly way, maybe I can get a kid or a parent to get this message to a kid before they take driver's training. Keep in mind, if you think about it, by the time a kid hits driver's training at age 16, 17, 18, he or she is already addicted to phone use, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're already texting with their
or a
friends.
device of some sort.
Yeah, so if I can get the message out early, don't use the phone if it's going to distract you from safety. Maybe I can prevent a few serious injuries or even deaths. And that's the story of those two children's books. I typically write social justice, And I believe that social justice for children is probably the most important thing I read.
So, what inspired you to write about those two topics, bullying and cell phones, texting while driving? Do you
Texting
have
while
any?
driving, texting while driving was a simple extension of handling cases where distracted drivers hurt people in my practice. I had a lot of clients who got into accidents as a result of texting and driving, telephoning and driving, makeup and driving. There's all kinds of distractions. People and the cars today, if you think about it, they're making it worse. All this technology they're putting in a car is wonderful, fun, but it takes away from the actual reason why we drive a car, and that's to get from point A to point B safely.
I have a scenario for you. So, if I was texting and I accidentally hit somebody who was on the side driving a bike and I clipped them, what could happen to me? Because I live in an area where that is people are walking on the side of the road where it's almost like a rural area, and like they shouldn't be walking there, and people have gotten hit that way, and when you look down at you veer off sometimes, you know what I mean, and
Yep,
it wouldn't take a whole lot to or the wrong time, or somebody being in the wrong place at the wrong time, or you,
yep,
and all it takes is just one look and one veer and you can clip somebody. So
yep.
if somebody does that, what could possibly happen to you?
Well, let me answer it. It's a hard question to answer
I mean,
without.
can the person, if they survive,
Well, hang
can they
on.
sue you personally?
Yes, well, absolutely. I mean that will almost undeniably happen. You will get sued by the person you hit. That's an absolute inevitability.
And if you're a kid, it's your parents that's going to get sued, right?
Well, typically you're driving your parents' car insured by your parents' insurance company, and if the insurance is inadequate, then your parents' own net worth is involved. But assuming the insurance is adequate, then typically insurance will pay for it. But I want to expand the answer a little bit because there are all sorts of facts that are important and can be left out in a story like that. Have you had anything to drink? If you had, then you're talking about a level of negligence that might reach criminal responsibility. Have you had tickets for the same kind of conduct? Have cops stopped you for erratic driving because you use the phone all the time and you haven't learned your lesson? That can result in criminal responsibility or gross negligence that exceed the coverage that you have in your insurance company and get to you personally. So if your story was, oh, I just looked down for a second one time and I happened to hit a person, they're not going to look as unfavorably as they would to the other two examples I gave you. The other point about that, though, putting aside guilt or innocence, is you mentioned the walker being in a place where he shouldn't be. In most states, we have what's called comparative or contributory negligence, and their negligence counts too. So, by all, you have a duty as a pedestrian to watch where you're going and to follow the rules of the road, just like a driver does. Are you as culpable as the guy that hits you because he's not paying attention? Of course you're not. Of course you're going to be the sympathetic party in that litigation, but you do bear some responsibility.
So the moral of the story, kids, don't
Behave
text and
yourself
drive, because
and behave
there's
yourself.
consequences. Consequences, are There are always consequences for our actions. In a nutshell, basically, right?
Yeah, don't do anything and drive. Drive. That's the purpose of the car.
True. All right, so we got 5:30. We got a few more minutes here. Let's see. You wanted to talk about, you had mentioned something about Jewish and people attacking Jews. I'm not so familiar with that. I mean, I know that there are different sects. I don't even know if that's, you would call them sects of Jewish people. Like there's the Torah Jews, right? There's the Abrahamic. There are the Anakasazi, I think, or I don't know.
Ashkenazi.
Ashkenazi. I can never pronounce that. Ashkenazi. Okay, there you go. I'm trying to mess it up. So there's these different, what would that be called?
Well,
Different sectors or faiths?
all it refers to is coming from different parts of the world. If you're an Ashkenazi Jew, you came from this part of the world. If you're a Sephardic Jew, you came from that part of the world. So most of the labels, if you want to call it that are put on certain or categories of Jewish people are based on where you come from. Whether you came from, I think it's Spain on the one hand, or Poland / Russia / Germany on the other hand. Typically, that's what Ashkenazi and Sephardic refer to. But in terms of where you came from or not, the what we were talking about off the air was a troubling trend that has taken place. I would say, I mean, America has always had its versions of anti-Semitism. You asked me, by the way, a question that I only answered half of. You asked me what the inspiration was for the 2 children's books. I gave you the answer on the distracted driving side. I did not give you the answer on the bullying side.
No,
and the answer is that when I was a young kid, I moved from an all-Jewish neighborhood to a neighborhood that had almost no Jews in it. And some kid asked me, true story, some kid asked me, what church do I attend? And I said, this shouldn't surprise anybody. I said, I don't attend church. I attend synagogue. And this kid punched me in the mouth and knocked me to the ground. That incident was the inspiration for the book called Happy Jack, Sad Jack. Yes, I used a biracial kid rather than a Jewish kid, but my own experience was the inspiration for that. So when you talk about anti-Semitism in the news lately, it's been around in America for quite a long time. And I would imagine that the kid who hit me back in the 60s, I would say it was, is a father or a grandfather of a Jew hater. It shit flows downhill, as you know. So here we are in 2017, and you've got Charlottesville, Virginia, and a bunch of guys marching with tiki torches, shouting, "Jews will not replace us." You've got Kanye West saying he's going to go DEFCON 3 on Jewish people. Why?
That's what I was going to ask you. Why do you think
Kyrie Irving?
That is?
You've got Kyrie Irving accusing Jews of controlling the slave trade and worshiping the devil. You've got Trump posting on social media that Jews have to get their act together and show more appreciation for Israel before it's too late, like he knows Israel better. There are reports that some of the mass shootings, like the one in Buffalo or El Paso or Pittsburgh, were motivated by these kinds of ideas. And I want to throw out this notion. They call Jew hatred anti-Semitism. And if you ask the average person what anti-Semitism is, they won't know the answer to that. But if you say to somebody, this guy is a Jew hater, they'll absolutely know what that means. So what I was suggesting to you off the air was we ought to call it what it is. And maybe, just maybe, talking about it on shows like this and identifying what it actually is and how ridiculous it is. You know, we're 2% of the population. 2%. We're a threat to nobody. So for someone to say Jews will not replace us, to this day, I don't know of any Jew that replaced any white Christian.
Well,
or doing so as a group. It's not going to happen.
what I think, well, at least what I know of what Kanye's said, and sort of the things that he was referring to. I mean, I've read some, heard some of that type of stuff. I think a lot of the times people just see that the leaders in finance are usually Jewish. The leaders in Hollywood are usually Jewish.
But those are the themes that we're talking about. When you say usually, you're kind of conceding to those people who make those kinds of rationalizations. By the way, I'm not suggesting that they don't play prominent roles in those fields, but I would tell you categorically that for every Steven Spielberg, there's a James Cameron, and that if you look at the industries you're talking about, the financial industry, the music industry, the movie industry, you will find without question that the majority of people who run those industries are white Christians, without a doubt. Now, are there prominent Jewish people in those industries? Absolutely, yes. But it's a stereotype, frankly, to suggest that those industries are, quote, run by, unquote, Jews.
I was just telling you what
I know you weren't.
He's referring to. I personally don't know Jewish people. Because I don't know. I don't go looking for. Hey, are you Jewish? Are you Jewish? Are you Jewish?
Well, we don't wear it. We don't wear it on our face like.
Where in the world's the Jew today? You know what I mean? I don't look at it like that. I say, are you a good person? Okay,
I understand.
You know what I mean? If you're a shithead, I don't want to have nothing to do with you. Go away. That's just how I look at it.
I like that philosophy. Whether you're a white shithead or a black shithead, you're a shithead, right?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter. There's shitty people all over the place, and hopefully, I don't run across those in my day to day. And if I do, it's like, okay, well, I'm gonna try not to let him ruin more of my day than having crossed my path. Because any more space than that, then I got problems. You know what I mean? Letting people rent space in my head for free.
I would just, I like to quote Rodney King all those years ago.
Can we always get along?
I use it all the time. Can't we all get along? It's the greatest quote of the 20th century. I really believe that. I just think that Americans should celebrate our differences rather than fight over. Can't we all get along?
That sounds amazing. That actually does. It sounds amazing. Unfortunately, I think that the media plays a huge role in the division that we see all over the place. I mean, every opportunity it seems that they get, they use it to divide, even further down. I mean, look what happened during the pandemic. COVID split up a whole bunch of people, split my family up, right? Into two different camps. You're either, this or you're that. And, some people on that side are really, really about that, and some of us are not. And so it was really crazy to see all that go down. But I mean, it's been happening way before that. It's just, they put a huge wedge during that period.
How old are you?
49.
Okay, so if you think about it, I'm 70, as I said, so I'm a little older than you.
Just
But
a little. Just a
um,
wee.
I remember a time when the news was delivered by someone who's just delivered the news. They didn't deliver a ton of opinions, and there weren't all-day news channels like CNN and MSNBC and Fox News that gave you slanted views of the news. So part of what you're talking about is where you get your news from. And if MSNBC says this, Fox News says that. It stopped becoming news. It becomes rhetoric. I told you, for instance, that I wrote my first novel after starting to write a nonfiction account of what happened. The news today is almost a novel rather than a nonfiction account. It's whatever that channel's constituency is. Take news. It's
Yeah,
not
hot
the news.
takes.
It's
The
not
hot
the
take.
news.
Breaking. And it all sort of changed when I think Reagan changed it when they did the Fair Information Act, or they did away with it, or there was some sort of piece of legislation that was passed that made it to where they don't have to get both sides. You know what I mean? It can just be it's basically infotainment now.
Correct.
And there's no, you know what I mean, there's no accountability, and that's why you've got so many people going to independent media sources, like who's that, Glenn Greenwald, he's a good example.
Right.
Max Blumenthal is another good example. You've got, who's that other guy, Chris Hedges, that's another great example of somebody who's is always speaking truth to power
Yep.
and the such.
Well, think about it. Think about it. When I was a kid, you had three major networks. You had Walter Cronkite, Huntley Brinkley Report, and ABC didn't even have a newscast until much later on when you were a kid. But everybody got their news from Walter Cronkite or David Brinkley and Chet Huntley. Before that, they got the news from Edward R. Murrow, and it was simply the news. This happened in Washington. This happened in Detroit. This happened in Los Angeles. You didn't get all these opinions and political distinctions between this side and that side and everybody fighting with each other. And, is that the media? Is that politics? Our politics could be a little less, or a little more civil. Can't we get along? Should apply to that too. I'd like to see politicians from both sides get something done for the country for a change. It seems to be
we need a reboot, not a reset. We don't need a great reset. We need a reboot. You know what I mean? The reset, they can take that thing back to the WEF.
It's too late for a reset. We need a
let's just do a real quick. Let's just give a jump start. You know what I'm saying? You ever do a bump start? You ever bump start a stick shift?
A pox on all their houses.
Yeah, we're just in a crazy place. But I mean, I guess it's as crazy as you let it get you. I mean, you still got to go to work. You still got to go and do the normal things. You still got to be a good person. You still got to, do whatever it is you need to do to survive. And, all the craziness that goes on around us. I mean, even the national scene, you know what I mean? Our national politics, to me, it's just this huge soap opera. And all the CNN pundits and all the MSNBC pundits and all these other people that are talking about it they're talking about this week's episode, really. You know what I mean? They're talking about what's happening in Washington this week, what's going on in the theater of Washington this week, and they're just commenting. You know what I mean? They're the comment section of a YouTube fucking channel.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
That's it. And they're just a huge distraction. And if you're paying so much attention to that, what you're not paying attention to is what's happening in your own backyard and in your own political scene in your community, where things actually make a difference to you.
Well, I think that's largely true. The idea that national politics don't affect you, I mean, just look at the last 4 years or 6 years. National politics absolutely affect us. But to your point, your day-to-day life is certainly affected by the local environment much more so than the national environment. What I would say though is, again, I'd like our civil discourse to be much more civil. The idea that we can't disagree with each other without being it's us versus them all the time, that didn't exist back then, and I'm old enough to remember when it didn't. And there are people who are adults today who are not old enough to remember when it didn't. And that, I think, is a sad thing for America.
I remember debates. I remember conversations. I remember stuff like that on PBS. I remember, and it wasn't short form like it is now. It wasn't just bites. You know what I mean? You would actually get an idea, and that just doesn't happen anymore. Actually, it seems like if you don't go along with certain narratives, you get shut up. You get shut down. And when you try to bring up your point, and certain, I don't know, communities, when they don't like your point, they just start throwing, and when they don't have an argument against what you're saying, instead of showing their argument, they attack you personally instead and derail the whole thing, and then turn it into something completely different. And that happens quite a bit. That's happened to me quite a bit.
It does. It does.
And that doesn't do anything. And nobody gets to see that side. And then, you know what I mean? And then if you react to that, now you're the bad person,
Well,
and so it's
the
just an interesting place, man. It's just
yep.
so strange.
It's a tough time right now. No question. No question.
But I think we can get through it. I mean, we got through everything else. I mean, I don't think that
we always have.
I don't think that I think the way that we're going to end up off of this place is the universe is going to shake us off like they have the last 2 or 3 times that it's done it already. I think we're in more trouble of that coming than we are like any sort of civil war or anything else. I mean, people will be people, and at some point, the pendulum will shift and it'll go back into a different direction. That's what it does. It just keeps going this way, and hopefully there's more correction, because it doesn't seem like the last few years there's been a lot of correction, just a lot of just going in one direction and not paying attention to anything. But hopefully pendulum will swing back into a more balanced society.
Amen.
Not that I'm any kind of preacher or anything, but I just hope, man.
That was a great sermon. I like that sermon. You should write that up.
Well, thanks, man. Well, maybe I could have Chat GPT help me out just a little bit too. I'll transcribe.
I could send a rabbi. I'll send a rabbi your way.
All right. All right, Mark. Well, we got to wrap this up. So all of your books and everything, is everything about you available on your website?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, we got that right there on the screen. So everybody catch Mark over at markmbello.com. You can catch all of his books there, all the podcasts that you've done. Do you have your own podcast too?
I have a podcast called Justice Counts.
Okay.
It is typically a legal themed podcast, but if you think about the word justice or the word injustice, that can happen in different areas of your life that have nothing to do with the law.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll give you one great example that you could identify with. I listened to your intro. You had some criminal problems in your life. Tell the people what it's like to try to get a job after you get out of prison, even though you're qualified for the job.
Well, it wasn't a huge problem. I went into a union and to the trade, so it really didn't affect me a whole lot. And they also gave the credits you know what I mean, for hiring a felon. So like for the first 2 years, it's a benefit for them to have you on. And so I
Okay.
got lucky. You know what I mean? I'm one of the lucky guys that made it through and was able to prosper
But
you know.
you know what I'm referring to.
Yes, I do. I do.
Now
It's very difficult if you don't have if you're not afforded certain privileges, you know what I mean? And, you know, because, you know, when you come out of prison, a lot of times you don't have anything and you go back to the same situation where you didn't have anything to begin with. That's why you got in trouble.
right.
And so, you know, I was lucky enough to be able to go back to a situation where I had help from family. So
Just one example though of a typical injustice. Buying a house, getting a mortgage, if you've got a few marks on your credit, if you want to live in a certain community but you have a little bit less money than that typical community does, or if you're a person of color and you want to move into a white neighborhood, they put roadblocks in your way that might be legal but are still an injustice. So we like to
mhm.
talk about things outside the box, if you will, sometimes that
What do you call that?
create
Redlining?
an injustice that has nothing to do with the law necessarily. It's called
Yeah.
Justice Counts is the name of the podcast.
Awesome.
It's
I was going to ask you what you were referring to. Is that called redlining?
well, it legally, if you redline, that's not if you think about, for instance, what Trump did back when his father was alive to keep these citizens out of his exclusive apartment buildings in New York. That's an example of redlining.
Mm.
But you can redline without redlining. You can just make it uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And again, I'm not. I don't have specific facts to give you. All I'm saying is there are ways to look at injustice that have nothing to do with the law.
And I'm sure we can all, and people listening too, can all identify with having been felt uncomfortable in some situation where, you know, maybe you weren't wanted or welcomed, or everybody knows that feeling and it doesn't feel very good.
How about the whole woke situation? Now, there are certain things
We
that
don't have time for that one.
are, but there are certain things that I think are woke. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I think you can tell that I'm a left-leaning person, but that doesn't mean that I don't think that there are things that they declare, that the left declares politically correct, that I think are ridiculous. But if you look at the right side of that equation, and someone says, "Let's ban a book when we have a First Amendment in this country, and let's ban a book called To Kill a Mockingbird, the best legal novel ever written, in my ban To Kill a Mockingbird, ban Catcher in the Rye, ban One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest." Are you crazy?
Yeah,
So
there's a lot of interesting stuff going on there.
that's a whole different podcast, right?
Yeah, it is the
Uh,
woke ideology. I mean, I mean,
yep.
that's far left. You know what I mean? Left. I
Or
think
far
most
right.
people. I think
The banning comes from, especially here in Florida where I am right now. I live in Michigan, but I winter in Florida because I'm a senior. You want a Jewish stereotype?
Are you a bluebird?
You want a Jewish stereotype?
Are you a
Um,
bluebird?
Snowbird, they call it.
Yeah, or
They call
snowbird?
it
Yeah, snowbird.
snowbird.
You
Yes,
going
I'm a
down
snowbird.
to Boca, and the
I'm in Delray Beach,
all right.
which is the next town over. But anyway,
Okay.
um, DeSantis who is a right wing Republican, is the spearhead for book banning in Florida. He doesn't want kids reading this or kids reading that, or
Oh, the CRT stuff.
or colleges teaching this or colleges teaching that. There's a controversy over a curriculum about teaching slavery as it actually happened. We don't want that. We don't want the truth. I have problems with that. Do I
I haven't really looked too much into his. I heard about what he's been doing there, but I haven't delved too much into it.
Do I think kids at a very young age might be eased into these topics? Might have history sugar coated for them? Sure. But ultimately, I think American citizens deserve the truth. And if you remember, what was it, A Few Good Men? You can't handle the truth. Yes, we can. And I think we ought to.
I do too.
Anybody who tries to prevent the dissemination of the truth should be silenced. That's not the truth. We should be telling the truth.
I agree. I think we should keep it 100% right there. It's right behind me. Keep it 100. That means keep it real.
I love.
All right, Mark.
Is that a real background, or is that a
no? It's a green screen. It's a green screen.
I love it though.
Behind me. Thank you. I appreciate it, man. All right, everybody. Mark M. Bello, check him out. His a podcast, and every place that Mark is at, you can find him at markmbello.com. And I appreciate it, Mark. Have a good evening, brother.
Thank you, Sean. You too. Appreciate it.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to the Nowhere to Go But Up podcast. Sean is a single dad, a union blue-collar guy, and he spent time in federal and state prison for drug trafficking and fraud. When he was released from prison in 2006, all he had was the clothes on his back, a bag of mail, and some paperwork. Since then, he's turned his life around and shares the struggles and successes on this podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we hope you were moved. To connect to the show, book a guest spot. For merch, Patreon, PayPal, and social media links, go to linktr.ee/nowhere to go but up. On Instagram at Nowhere to Go But Up Now. On Twitter at But Up Now. On the YouTube channel at Nowhere to Go But Up Podcast. See you next time.